Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt, standing by for Evan Brennan. I know exactly one agent well. Sports agents, there are hundreds, maybe thousands of sports agents in the world, and I know one well, Evan Brennan. And Evan's Twitter handle is Evan the Agent. All right, so it's pretty easy to follow him on Twitter. And I know Evan well because I had Evan as a student, 15 years ago. He's a very fine con law student. But even at the time, Evan told me he wanted to be a sports agent. And I encourage everyone in whatever they want to do, what their passion is. But I'm always very skeptical about people who want to be sports agents or go into the analytics business or, do anything having to do with professional sports, because the barriers to entry are so very, very high, established by people like Scott Boras and other super agents who have giant stables of young wannabe agents, and they want to block out competition. But the world has changed because of name, image, and likeness laws. Now, that's what I'm going to have him talk to us about whenever he joins us, but we're having trouble with the tech side. Evan, welcome. How are you, my friend? Good morning. We're not hearing you, Evan. It's that Utah sound problem. We got the same problem we had with Jim Talent this morning. We're going to figure it out. Harley will figure it out, and we'll get him on, and we'll talk to him through the break. And okay, so Evan, I was just telling people you were my law student, but I can't remember what year you graduated.
2015, Hugh.
Okay, so it has been a long time. Congratulations on making a go of it as a sports agent. Let's give people some background. Who do you represent? How do you find them? What do you do for them?
So I represent Luke Rhodes, highest paid long snapper in the NFL, the All-Pro for the Indianapolis Colts. He's probably one of my more notable guys that I represent, and nearly 20 other athletes across the NFL. But these are guys that I find that, the NFL likes in college, and you hunt them down and show them your value and get them to work with you. Starting usually just as soon as they finish their bowl games in December and January of a given year.
Now, Evan Brennan, what's your website if people want to find you?
So I'm one of the partners at United Athlete Sports. Our website is uasports.us.
Okay, uasports.us. Now, Evan Brennan, I have you on because next week I'm going to talk down at ALEC with a bunch of state legislators about name, image, and likeness laws. There's like a jungle of them out there. They've all arrived in the last 2 years. Would you tell people what generally name, image, and likeness, abbreviated NIL, means for young athletes?
It means that they get compensated, in theory, for doing deals and promotions for companies, both national and local, as professional athletes, even though they are in college. They can promote products, they can promote services, they can promote brands, just like a professional athlete would that you'd see in any other walk of life, and they can do so while they're in college.
So I talked last week with a senior executive at a sports manufacturing company who told me deals for some high school athletes are 7 figures now from colleges. Was that individual exaggerating?
No, I mean, that's the way it's going. You're seeing kids coming out of high school, some of the top quarterbacks that are recruited by major colleges. And there's, if you go to on3.com, you can actually track these NIL deals. And that's really how it's going. That is correct.
Well, what do youngsters do? I mean, agents come in all sizes, variety, and ethical scale. I told people, I trust you on this. I know you. I know your values. But how does a young person find an agent without getting scalped?
It's really hard. It requires these kids and their advisors to do a lot of homework into the credentials, into the backgrounds, into the morals of the folks that they entrust to negotiate these deals and find these deals. So for a high school kid, he's really, really got to make sure he's going with the right guy. And, I would advise a guy obviously to go with an attorney, somebody that's represented other players in the past, has a strong background, is not going to promise them the world, but is going to put together a really cohesive, smart, intelligent, business progressive plan to get them where they need to be as far as that goes. But just so you know, Hugh, not every single high school athlete's making this kind of money. This is very few and far between.
You anticipated my next question. My executive told me, look, you might find a softball athlete who's a girl in college who gets an NIL deal, but you might find, there are 20 athletes who get no money for one who gets some money. Is that about right?
Yeah, in college, I read a number that it's about $3,000 if you take all scholarship athletes across the entire board. So it's really, really few and far between. I think the number is 67% of all NIL dollars go to college football and college basketball.
All right, stand by, Evan. We're going to come back and continue to talk with you. I got to wrap up the radio show and put this on the podcast. Evan, what's the website again, real quickly?
It is uasports.us.
uasports.us. I'm coming right back with Evan the Agent on Twitter because I really don't want, if you're a youngster going to school right now or the mom and dad of a promising athlete, don't fall into the swamp. All right, don't do that. Do your homework. We'll talk about how to do that with Evan when we come back. He'll be on the podcast today after Ron DeSantis and Tom Cotton. Thanks for listening. Talk to you tomorrow on the next Hugh Hewitt Show. Welcome back, America. Hugh Hewitt talking with Evan Brennan, Evan the Agent on Twitter. You can follow him, find him online at United Athlete Sports, uasports.us. I think I got that right. So, Evan, here's the real question. Someone's driving around listening to this podcast, and they say, I got a kid who's a promising athlete. My kid's going to play Division I X. Not football, not basketball. Let's start with that. Going to play Division I soccer, Division I women's basketball, Division I anything other than football or basketball. What should that parent do not to have a missed opportunity?
First and foremost, make sure that the social media looks good, feels good, and is projecting the right images they want. Most of these deals are put together based on your social media presence. So that goes down to follower count and engagement and willingness to work with brands that the individual actually cares about. So if you're a parent and you've got a kid that's, a top-end athlete, make sure they're not doing stupid stuff on social media, first and foremost.
Oh, very good. I hadn't even thought about that. So if someone calls you up, what do you do? If someone calls Evan Brennan up and their daughter is being recruited Division I hoops somewhere, Division I volleyball somewhere, what is the first thing you do?
I'm looking at their social media and I'm seeing how many followers they have today. And I can kind of give an estimate as to whether or not this is a viable opportunity for NIL right away. Brands and companies are going to want the follower count. They're going to want that engagement. There's softwares out there that will actually measure the engagement that an individual has on social media with their followers, and that can be converted into dollars. So I'm, taking a look at those kinds of things and seeing, hey, is this, what's kind of the valuation, just like an investor would, and I can give the parent a good idea.
Should parents comparison shop agents? And I'm saying parents because most of these athletes are under the age of 18. They can't do anything without their parents. They can't sign a binding contract. So my question is, when I get a roof repair or if I need my HVAC check, I always get 2 or 3 prizes. Just telling my son last week, don't do anything until you have 2 or 3 bids. Does that apply to agents?
110%. 110%. You get at least a good feel for what the market is, what the values, and what the abilities are. 110%.
How many cold calls do you get a day, and how many generally do agents get? Because you must be overwhelmed with cold calls that are just not, really there.
NIL doesn't form a huge part of my business, but just for representation of any sort in general, I get at least 2 or 3 reach outs a day for various different representation purposes in sports.
And what do you do?
So for guys that are trying to go to the NFL, I've got a good idea as to whether or not it makes sense to continue the conversation very far. Sometimes I'll push them off to some other people that may have less business, on their plate. Sometimes it's someone that's really in dire need, and I'll just give them some straight advice on the phone. Sometimes it really is an opportunity that I should chase down. And so you just really got to kind of sift through like intake like a lawyer as to whether or not it makes sense to continue the conversation.
I've got 3 or 4 different podcasts on NIL. None of them make any sense. They're not very good. And I don't mean to, I'm not going to throw shade on anyone. They're trying. Is there anybody who covers this subject well in a podcast format, Evan Brennan?
There's some folks that you really kind of need to take a look at, but I'm not aware of any singular source that I would go to a podcast and really check out. There's a lot of different websites that I use to kind of track what the NIL market is. Like I said, on3.com is the website that I use.
Can you spell that out for me? I've not heard of that. Slow down. Tell me what that is again. On3?
And yep.com. And what that does is that is right now the website that's tracking and ranking the top NIL deals.
Okay. Is the number 3 spelled out, or is it the number 3?
No, it's the number 3.
Okay, on3.com. So now, Evan, I want to go to the big guys. Division I football and basketball. All right, Division I football and basketball.
Right.
If you're a serious player, what kind of money are you looking at? Not a quarterback, that's different. I'm talking about like an offensive lineman or a good DB, and you're on the top 100 prospects. Maybe you're a 4-star or a 3-star. What are you looking at in terms of money?
I mean, so obviously, LeBron James's son is the top paid NIL athlete right now. And then you're looking at actually an LSU gymnast a female gymnast is actually the second highest compensated according to on3.com. So there's a little bit of modeling that comes into play with some of these high-end deals. And so women's sports can really tap into these. But if you're kind of, like you say, a more average athlete, depending on who you're recruited by, you're probably looking, 5 figures. If you're in that range, 5 figures. If you're a marquee position and you're kind of that 4-star, you're looking at kind of low 6 figures.
All right. So when the bigs come calling, the SEC, the Pac-10, and of course the Big Ten, the most important one of them all, how do they approach this with an athlete? Does an athlete sit down with coaches with their agent? Is that allowed now?
So really what happens is it's done by groups that are called collectives. And these are groups of boosters that essentially, work this on behalf of the university, not officially, but because they are boosters, but that's really how this works. These are business people that, have an interest in the success of the university that a lot of times run prominent businesses and are interested in compensating athletes and encouraging them to come play for the university. They're the ones that kind of pay out these deals. And that's really what On3 is looking at, is these collectives of boosters. And that's how it's done. So are the coaches involved? Maybe, maybe not, but there's at least an idea that a collective will be involved on behalf of the university.
Well, this is the dilemma I come to. I know about the NC2A rules. Charlie Baker's the new president of the NC2A. I'm sure he's going to be a good president. I know some coaches like Urban and a few others, and I know that they're very, very ethical and they don't want to get in trouble. The latter do not want to get in trouble with the former. So when they're doing their ordinary recruiting, the recruiting that you grew up with, that I have been watching for decades, it's very ballet specific. I mean, you got to be careful not to take. Ohio State self-reported itself for dropping off an athlete at a pizza party off campus. Okay, they're going to slap on the wrist on it. They're not going to lose a scholarship. Where does the baton get passed to the athlete on an NIL deal between the coaches and the collective? Because you don't want the collective paying money to an athlete that isn't going to sign or that the coaches don't want.
Yeah, so then that's kind of where the shroud of mystery kind of comes into play a lot of the times. The school probably makes the player aware of NIL deals that their boosters have been able to get them, and and kind of guide those discussions. But you're right, they don't want to get in trouble. They don't want to be out there promising things that they can't. And how do you enforce this? There's just so much gray area and mist and smoke on this, and that really becomes kind of the fog of war on this as to where it goes, where it is actually right now, what's real, what's not, what the laws are, because it's kind of the wild, wild west. So as to how it's done, it varies institution to institution, and morally and ethically, it kind of really varies institution to institution and coach to coach.
2 more questions, Evan, and I appreciate your time this morning. First one is, when a kid interviews a bunch of agents, should they just say no thank you if that agent doesn't have experience with a collective? And are you allowed to tell them that, for example, you have experience with these collectives but not these collectives? How do you get the details on that for an athlete?
I wouldn't dismiss it straight out of hand if an agent's never had experience with the collective, but it should be an enormous factor. I'd be really hesitant to sign with an agent, especially if I'm a marquee athlete, if an agent hasn't had experience. But yeah, I mean, an agent that's talking to NIL is going to tell, hey, these are the deals that I've brokered on behalf of these clients with these collectives. And you should, as a parent, understand pretty well and easily what the deals this agent's done and their track record as it relates to NIL. So 100% yes.
Okay, my last question. Are these deals contingent on performance? In other words, they sign, they get a payment. Does that payment end if they get injured? And ought the young athlete, as a result, take out insurance with their first NIL payment against that injury?
I would always advise a very conservative strategy. Number one thing that I see is a lot of athletes don't prepare for taxes. This is taxable income. And so I usually advise athletes to retain a CPA, and I usually get involved in that pretty heavily in the retention of a CPA so once they get this compensation. But as it relates to the contractual terms, there's different things. It's usually on a year-to-year basis. You can try to negotiate for a 4-year kind of overall deal during the duration that they're enrolled. There's all different ways these deals are structured. And so that's one of the real reasons you want an agent, is just to understand how they're structured. To be honest with you, Hugh, some of these deals are kind of handshaky, and that gets kind of iffy. And as far as it's hard. So you got to be really, really careful. And that's why you need a talented representative working with you, because of some of the handshake nature of some of these deals.
Okay, I lied. One more question. I've worked with literary agents for 30 years, and I've got the best one in the business right now, a lawyer who charges me by the hour. But I also had agents who did 10% or 15% on books. Now, I'm my own agent on radio because I know radio and I know contract structure. But what is the best way for an athlete, to find an hourly or to find a retainer? There are advantages both ways in the literary world. I just don't know about the athletic world.
So as far as it goes, representing players in the NFL for traditional deals that you see, 99% of agents are doing a traditional 3%. That's when you see these guys playing in the NFL on Sundays, they're paying their agents 3%. There's maybe one or two exceptions, but that's really, really how it works.
It's only 3%?
It's 3% or less. Some of the first rounders that you'll see, some of the high key guys, is 1%. Now, wow. that's on their salary with the team. It can be 15 to 20 or higher on endorsement deals. And a lot of agents make back all their money on signing the big Nike, Adidas, Under Armour deals as far as it relates to endorsements. Now, on the NIL front, I've seen all different kinds of pay structures because of the Wild West nature of it. Most of them are going to be, on a retainer base, or excuse me, on a commission basis, not a retainer base, just because it's, same kind of thing, hunting deals down. An hourly rate is probably not going to be in the market for most athletes, just because if the agent's unable to find deals, the athlete's going to get stuck with a huge bill. These are high school and early college kids that just aren't going to be able to pay it, and it's just not going to be really, really competitive in the market.
Hadn't thought about that.
Same kind of thing.
Hadn't thought about
You're
that.
The same kind of thing.
Evan Brennan, I'm going to get you back again on this, but you've armed me for my conversations with state legislators next week, and I appreciate it. I hope young athletes are listening, and whether or not they use Evan, that they do get some comparison shopping. Evan Brennan, thank you. Evan the Agent on Twitter, United Athlete Sports, UASports.us. Thank you, Evan.
Thanks so much, Hugh.